Yellowstone National Park is one of the most beautiful places in the United Promise. It's home to thousands of different species of plants and animals, and millions of tourists visit each year to take in its natural beauty. But did you know that it's also home to one of the largest supervolcanoes on Earth? And if this volcano were to erupt, there would be no place on Earth that would remain untouched by its destruction. This is the day Yellowstone explodes. What happens to our cities? When most people think of volcanoes, they imagine something like Mount Vesuvius destroying the Roman city of Pompeii, a massive amount of lava spilling over the horizon and completely covering anything in its path. But the eruption of Yellowstone wouldn't be anything like that. Instead, the area around the volcano would experience hundreds of earthquakes ranging from 7.2 to 7.8 on the Richter scale. These earthquakes would trigger landslides, collapsing bridges and other infrastructure and knocking people off their feet. Entire sections of road would buckle and shift and thousands of buildings would be destroyed. But at least most of these buildings would still stand after the earthquake. After all, the real destruction would come when Yellowstone really started to blow. At some point during the first few hours of the eruption, hot magma would burst through the surface of the earth, and lava would begin flowing across the surrounding countryside. But this wouldn't be the worst part of the eruption either. Instead, the most devastating aspect of the explosion would be the pyroclastic flows that would radiate out from the center of the volcano and cover everything in a layer of hot ash. Pyroclastic flows are extremely hot and travel incredibly fast, sometimes reaching speeds of up to 400 miles per hour. They consist of hot gas and solid matter, and can reach temperatures of up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, there's nothing that can stop them. Anything in their path will be incinerated instantly. Houses will burn to the ground, trees will char, and even rocks will melt. There's literally nothing that can survive being hit by a pyroclastic flow at full force. And what makes things worse is that 3/4 of the land surrounding Yellowstone is owned by private individuals, most of whom have built their vacation homes there because of how beautiful the area is. Unfortunately for them, those vacation homes would not be able to withstand the intense heat of a pyroclastic flow, and most of them would burn to the ground within seconds of the eruption beginning. But while the people near Yellowstone might be able to find some shelter in their homes during the earthquakes or maybe even try to outrun the advancing lava, the same can't be said about the residents of any city. To understand why, we need to look at what would happen to the air currents around the world if Yellowstone were to erupt. When Yellowstone erupted 640,000 years ago, it ejected so much material into the atmosphere that it's believed that it blotted out the sun. For weeks, days, or even months, ash rained down over North America and around the world. Plants withered and died, animals starved, and entire ecosystems collapsed, and it would be the same thing all over again if Yellowstone were to erupt today. If the eruption was large enough, the ash and gases ejected from the volcano would begin to block out the sun, plunging North America and most of the world into darkness. In fact, scientists believe that such an eruption could plunge the entire planet into darkness for months. But that wouldn't be the only effect on the atmosphere. Supervolcanoes like Yellowstone don't just eject solid matter, they also emit huge amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide. These gases would trap heat in the atmosphere, leading to global warming, and because of the lack of sunlight, global temperatures would drop. Basically, a giant volcanic eruption would throw the Earth's climate completely out of whack. The climate chaos caused by a Yellowstone eruption would lead to severe storms, hurricanes, flooding, and droughts. Crops would wither in the fields, food shortages would cause famine, water shortages would cause riots, temperatures could rise 15 degrees in some areas, causing massive wildfires to break out. Global cooling could lead to the formation of an ice age. Animal migrations would alter ecosystems. People would die. Quite simply, the world as we know it would end. But even if the world didn't end, major cities like Salt Lake City, Boise, Idaho Falls, and Billings, Montana, would be completely buried under tons of volcanic ash. The closer a city got to the volcano, the thicker the layer of ash would be. Some places near the volcano would be covered under more than 3 feet of ash, pumice, and other debris. But even cities that were more than 100 miles away from Yellowstone would be covered in several inches of ash. Ash would rain down from the sky for weeks after the eruption, slowly but surely burying everything in sight. Eventually, entire cities would be covered under many feet of ash and debris. But even if the cities managed to avoid total burial, they wouldn't be able to avoid the choking ash that would fill their skies. Schools would be closed for weeks, or even months. Hospitals would be overwhelmed with patients suffering from ash-related illnesses. Firefighters would struggle to contain the fires that would inevitably break out when sparks flew. Planes would be grounded because the ash would damage their engines. Roads would be too slippery to drive on. Businesses would shut down. Factories would grind to a halt. No goods or services would be provided. The cities would effectively become ghost towns as everyone stayed indoors to avoid the ash. In fact, the ash would probably cause widespread gridlock. Even if the power wasn't knocked out by the earthquakes, the layer of ash covering the roads would prevent anyone from getting to the power stations to keep them running. No electricity would be available, no water would run through the taps, no sewage systems would be operational. Life as we know it would cease to exist. So, let's imagine that you live in a major American city like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, or Houston. How would you escape the effects of the Yellowstone eruption? The simple answer is that you couldn't. The only way to escape the effects of a Yellowstone eruption would be to fly away, but even that would be tricky since airports would quickly be shut down due to the ash clouds, and once you were airborne, where would you go? Every single place on Earth would be affected by the Yellowstone eruption. The ash would eventually spread to every corner of the planet. No place would be safe. You couldn't hide in your basement, you couldn't hide in your house, and you couldn't even hide in your city. But if you managed to flee your sinking city and make it to the countryside, what then? Would life somehow go back to normal? The answer is almost certainly no. Even if you managed to find food and water, you wouldn't be able to drink the water, and you'd probably get sick from eating the food. That's because the ash from the eruption would contaminate everything. Water sources would be undrinkable, crops would be unsafe to eat, food would be in short supply, water would be in shorter supply. Eventually the skies would clear, the ash clouds would dissipate, and the world would begin to heal. But for many years afterward, the area around Yellowstone would be completely stuck in a volcanic winter. Nothing would grow, animals would die, ecosystems would collapse, and the rest of the world would struggle to recover from the climate change caused by the eruption. Some people might find it easy to dismiss the threat posed by a volcanic eruption. After all, it's not like Mount Vesuvius struck a Roman city today, right? But that's exactly what makes the Yellowstone eruption so terrifying. It doesn't seem like the kind of disaster that could happen today, but at the same time, it seems like it could happen tomorrow. While there's no evidence that an eruption is imminent, scientists do agree that it's overdue. If Yellowstone were to erupt tomorrow, here's what would happen. In the immediate aftermath of the eruption, thousands would be killed or injured by the earthquakes and the pyroclastic flows. Cities near Yellowstone would be evacuated and buried under tons of ash. Within weeks, major cities across the country would be buried under ash and cut off from the rest of the world. Gridlock, starvation, and disease would ensue, airports would be shut down, planes would be grounded, the military would be deployed, martial law would likely be imposed, and the government would collapse. In short, society as we know it would cease to exist. What would happen next is anyone's guess. Maybe human civilization would collapse entirely and we'd be forced to start over from scratch. Maybe small pockets of survivors would struggle to rebuild society. Maybe the military would use the chaos to seize control. Maybe some madman would use the ensuing anarchy to declare himself emperor. Nobody knows what would happen. But one thing is for sure, it wouldn't be pretty. Now watch. Supervolcano Yellowstone Eruption, biggest ever in history. Or check out crazy Yellowstone facts that will blow your mind.